All right. Good morning, everyone. Can people online, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. All right, 11:15. We're gonna get started. So my name is David Susanto. I am a MBTS and THM student. I'm here to introduce our speaker today. Justin Long is the Director of Research from Beyond. I'm also will be hosting the online. So if you guys have any questions, raise your hand or type it on the chat or type it to me. I'll monitor it and we can ask the questions during the Q&A. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Justin.
Good morning. It's nice to have everybody here. We're going to be talking about gospel gaps and basically looking toward Easter 2033. I'm hoping to move through, I've got a lot of slides, but most of these will be fairly straightforward. And so I'm hoping to leave some time at the end for Q&A if you have questions, also for the online folks. So we'll just kind of get underway. This is a good map of the remaining task. Best way to exemplify this is by percent Christian. And this is, as everybody will probably recognize, something of the 1040 window. Some of the colors may be interesting to you. The red ones are obvious, China green, but yes, China is nearly 10% Christian at this point. So while it is not, the task isn't complete by any stretch, and there are still tens of millions of people who have not heard the gospel, still it's in a different position than, say, Arabia or Afghanistan or some of these. One of the interesting situations that we find ourselves in is this. This is the big trend. World population is falling off. So it should stabilize somewhere around 10 billion by 2100, which is a long way off, and a lot of things can change between now and then. But the interesting thing about this is why. Part of the reason, of course, is fertility is falling around the world. Lots of places are not having as many babies as they used to have. At the same time, infant mortality has dropped and life expectancies have increased, which means if you have very few babies and you have very few people dying, you have a world that's getting old. And in a lot of places around the world, that is one of the gaps that's opening up, because in many places we look at how we evangelize the young and we forget that we'll be old for longer. The world is also becoming nearly all urbanized. This map, so this one shows you that the world is aiming toward 10 billion in population. This one shows you that by about 2050, most of those 10 billion will live in cities. Most recently, one of the big changes was that Tokyo is no longer the #1 megacity in the world. It is now Jakarta, because they revised how they figured out how these populations worked. So in a world that is nearly all urbanized, we have to be thinking about gaps in cities, which is a very different prospect from gaps in peoples and languages. We have to think in terms of neighborhoods. We have to think in terms of social relationships within the city. So these are two factors that are basically going to frame a lot. You got to keep it in the back of your mind for the rest of what we're talking about here. First major thing that I want us to think about is the way that the world is fracturing. For a very, very long time, through the 1980s and 1990s, the world was globalizing. That's what we heard a lot about. I don't know if you remember it, but I do, when they were talking about the New World Order and everyone was really concerned about global government, New World Order, and all these kinds of things, right? So you got books like Friedman's The World is Flat. You got the McDonald's theory of peace. Two nations that both had McDonald's never went to war with each other. Well, all of that has been shattered. Now the world is deglobalizing. Now we get books like The End of the World is Just the Beginning, and Patrick Johnstone's great article about deglobalization. Now we have big walls being built. This is the rise in the number of border walls that have been constructed around the world. Just an astronomical number of places where people are literally being separated from each other by concrete and barbed wire and surveillance cameras and such things, right? We also have big walls stopping trade. So you can see the slack off in global trade as a percent of GDP because these walls are rising. Especially in the last couple of years, of course, we've had a lot of news about tariffs and about trade wars and about things like that, but this is nothing new. Deglobalization has been leading to a decrease in trade. Where there's a decrease in trade, there's a decrease in business mission. There's a decrease in business platforms. There's a decrease in business visas. There's a decrease in these kinds of innovative ways of getting into places. I distinctly remember being in Southeast Asia in a taxi ride. This was about 10 years ago now. And my taxi driver was lecturing me at length. I was counting the minutes until I got to my destination on the ills of then President George Bush and whether President Bush was personally monitoring my taxi driver and about all the things America did wrong and so forth. So the social barriers and the trade barriers are rising. Big crocodiles, I call them, are looming. So one of the things that happens as we deglobalize is that people that have power project power. Nations that have power project power. Some we're going to get into in a moment, but right now middle powers, I'm referring to them often as middle crocodiles, are throwing their weight around. The interesting thing here, this is percent change in arms exports from 2015 to 2025. Notice the USA, France, Russia, China, Germany, they've been typical providers of arms for a long time. They're a very small percentage and even seeing some declines. Russia, of course, isn't exporting any arms right now. But the big ones that are exporting arms now, Italy, Turkey, Poland, Iran, Jordan, the UAE doesn't even show up here, although it should. They're all distributing arms to places that are fighting. The UAE is bankrolling, for example, the war in Sudan. So we see a lot of these middle powers that are having their own influence in the world now. And of course, we have what I refer to as big elephants and dragons who are acting imperially. My phrase here is with much power comes little responsibility. Notice that green bar at the very bottom, that is the US military spending versus everybody else. So we have a world that is fracturing, it is deglobalizing, it is raising walls, and now we see multipolarization. And when you have multi-regions and multipolarization, you get middle powers that are powerful within their region and can throw their weight around. And you also have external imperial powers that are acting with impunity in these places, throwing their weight around too. And all of this creates an interesting context for the church to live in. Finally, we have, of course, what I refer to as the ants and the hyenas, the swarms and the packs. So this is jihadists, this is militant groups, this is warlords, this is bandits, this is criminal gangs, and they all operate in the small connections, the rural areas, the near urban areas. So you can see here the little reds, they're just small zones, but these zones can paralyze whole countries. Mali right now, one of the strategies they have is to basically, they put Bamako, the main city, under siege. They are stopping any fuel trucks going to Bamako just by hanging out on the highways and using rocket-propelled grenades on their fuel trucks as they go past, until demands are met, until their desires are made public. So this is leading to ungovernable spaces, right? And so now we have basically four categories in the world that the world is breaking into. We have the imperials, the superpowers who act with impunity. This isn't just the United States, right? China is also making steps this way. We have the middle powers where we say some are more equal than others. We have the weaker nations that have trouble keeping their security. And we have the ungoverned spaces. Some spaces on the board have no value to anyone. And now they have no responsible players either. And so they're just basically blank zones on the map. So now we can talk about believers who come from these backgrounds. Believers who come from walls backgrounds. They will say things like, sit down, young man. If God wants to evangelize the heathen, he will do it without your help or mine. Let's stay safe behind our walls. We have believers who come from elephant backgrounds. We can fix this if we have the right program. We have believers who are experiencing crocodile backgrounds, and they say, don't rock the boat. If you do, the authorities will come and they will shut us all down. And then we have ants, believers from ant backgrounds who trust God to show up and save us. And they're willing to do some very bold things as a result. As we move on, I want to ask the question, how different is this from the reality of the early church? As we move toward gaps, as we move toward the unevangelized, the church will have to move from positions of security behind walls, behind imperials, toward positions of insecurity, toward the ungoverned zones on the map, and to take on the risks of doing so. That was very much the same case in the early church. First Christians were under Rome, but as Christianity spread out, it had to go into ungoverned spaces, barbarian spaces, uncertain spaces, and they had to take on risks to do that. I'm going to shift into, as we think about this fracturing world, let's think about Matthew 24:14. Matthew 24. We're all very familiar with this passage. We love this passage. It's got all sorts of wonderful things out of which we make books and movies. But I want us to think about it in terms of thresholds and signs and environments that we operate inside. Okay? The 1040 window would look to be at war. This is a map of all the active conflicts in the world right now. I didn't even have to really flip any of these for recent events. We've just all been at war for a very long time. The active state-based conflicts as of 2024, 2025. The number of conflicts is on the rise. This is state-based conflicts by region from 1946 to 2024. You can see Africa is the top from there, the gold, Asia is the light green. You can see the rise in the number of wars. So when we think about wars and rumors of wars, yes, okay, in one sense they are increasing. But at the same time, is the world more violent? Well, no, not really. Not recently. This is the number of fatalities by type of violence. The red is total fatalities. The green underneath is the civilian. Now you notice the peak, that huge, enormous peak over there in 1993 to 1995. That is the Rwandan genocide. Since this map started, this is probably the worst conflict that we've had because of so many civilians who were killed, traumatized the country as a whole. But these little bumps, this one is the Arab Spring, and then this one is Ukraine plus Tigray. They don't even really, Tigray and Ukraine together came over 200,000. So the world is not really any more violent than it's been for a very, very long time. We do have a fair number of rumors of wars that are going around. So these are the one on the left there. There was a made-for-TV movie. It was like their Red Dawn, if you're old enough to remember Red Dawn. This was the Taiwanese Red Dawn. It was imagining what an invasion by China would look like. This thing aired on national television. That middle one there, the Swedish government just issued a pamphlet for surviving war, because they've got a lot of fears right now about what happens if, with Russia versus Ukraine after that. And then the last one here is the rumors of conflict in South Sudan. There are lots of places where there aren't full-bore war, not full wars declared, and yet we have rumors of war. We have close to wars. We have on the edge of wars. We have things that could kick off and never seem to kick off, but still have violence, still have a lot of conflict going on. And then, of course, we have even more informal wars. This is a map of all the jihadist attacks. In 2026, February, this is just 1 month. This is just the last month alone. This is all the attacks, right? February 2026 alone. The blue is demonstrations. The red is actual violence, bombings. And in the midst of this context, the kingdom, the church, is increasingly targeted. So when we live in a context of war, when we live in a context of rumors of wars, churches are considered soft targets. They are considered targets of opportunity in order to spread fear, in order to remove accountability, in order sometimes to attack because they are Christians, but oftentimes because they just are in the wrong place at the wrong time. It creates a very messy nuance. So the left one here is 500 churches and religious sites destroyed in Ukraine during its war. The third one over is a ministry for trauma and the church. This is a mission agency. How does this particular mission agency offer trauma healing services to people who live in this context? Right? Now, as many churches are destroyed and displaced and people are widowed and orphaned, it will create gaps. So one thing that we can think about is that by Easter 2033, how much of Christianity at that point, we can imagine, will be in a situation of perpetual warfare, of perpetual fighting, of ongoing violence. And what does that make for work, for ministry, when you live in that context? How many Christian leaders will be former militants? We'll come back to that. I heard from a friend of mine that Trevor today in the main session was talking about mentoring former militants. And that's something that in the US, there have been many things that caused me culture shock as I am in international meetings and conferences. Worship songs that feature the phrase, basically in some version, praise be to Allah is one, because that is the Arabic name for God. And the other one is former militants who are in the meeting. That has been an interesting dynamic as well. What is the role of the church in forgiveness and reconciliation? What is the role of the church in a situation of constant conflict where their leaders are former militants who used to hunt and kill? What is the role of the church for forgiveness and reconciliation in that situation? Right? It's no longer just a nebulous, oh, I forgive you for what our ancestors did. Now it is, I forgive you who used to. I forgive your father who used to. And what will be the shape of the church in the Middle East? It is in many places a ruined and devastated and gutted church, and in many places a flowering and beautiful and expanding church. Next one that the Matthew 24 talks about is earthquakes, famines, and plagues. So, we often think about signs of the time as they get closer and closer and closer. Are we getting closer to the end? So, first question is, are earthquakes increasing? Well, no, not really. So you see a kind of a ramp up there toward the left-hand side. That's not because earthquakes suddenly increased in that time period. It's because we deployed more sensors to detect more earthquakes. So it's a little artifact of the data. 1960 is really when the standard seismograph network established it. You can see the box there. So no, some years we have more earthquakes, some years we have less earthquakes. And this is really only the Mag 6 earthquakes or greater. There's little earthquakes all the time. My daughter said the other day that she'd been in a 4-pointer, and I'm thinking, okay, that's remarkable for where you were, but a 4-pointer is not really that strong of an earthquake, right? I remember in December 2020, I forget the year now, but it was the first year that we were in Southeast Asia, and I woke up early one morning and the bed was rocking, and I thought it was my wife was rocking our son back to sleep, but come to find out, it was the Aceh earthquake that had happened across the island from us. And so within a month, I was standing in Aceh. I thought I'd never be doing that, but I was there helping to bring medical supplies in. And the devastation of a 9+ point earthquake on a place that has no earthquake resilience is something you can't even imagine. I mean, half the city was washed into the sea, and the remaining half was all broken buildings. And so are earthquakes increasing? No, but they are having more impact as people move into more deadly earthquake zones. Here is one thing, however, the world is getting hotter. And I know in some places that's a controversial chart, but it is a reality. This is from the NOAA stats. You can see it's progressively getting hotter. So we have extreme heat events. And a lot of these extreme heat events are affecting religious events and Christian ministry. The Hajj is now a test of endurance. Climate shocks in the Sahel, India. I remember being in India. We were doing a survey thing, and it was like the third day in. It was the middle of the day, and it was probably outside about 110 or more, and the power went out. And it was like, there with the aircon. And there was no air conditioning. And we were in a room with about 15 or so people that were passing through, getting surveyed and going out. And yeah, I was suffering for Jesus. It was a challenge. But these heat events are affecting places where the unreached are. I asked one guy, not at this particular meeting, but at a different conference. I was asking, do you know of any work down in such and such a place? He said, oh yeah, no one wants to. It's so hot. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? The unreached bounded by where it's hot, where it's really heat. But in some of these places, it's almost hard to survive. And they are becoming less survivable. Heat leads to water stress and drought. Water stress and drought lead to famine. And so these affect the church as well. No war has started over water stress yet, but it has certainly amplified conflicts that the church has been in the middle of. So now a lot of mission agencies, like I've got one up here from AIM, are looking at what do you do for famine relief? What do you do when the kingdom is hungry? There's another one, displacement disasters. This isn't in the Matthew 24 yet. It's becoming a bigger and bigger thing. This is from the Sudan war. There's plenty of other places where this is happening too. Sudan is the worst of the worst right now. Something like 13, 15 million people have been displaced from their homes. And they're all outside, for the most part, outside Sudan in refugee camps that look like this. The kingdom is hungry and thirsty. And this opens up gaps. Where are people willing to work? Who are they willing to work with? I know one of the controversies that I've dealt with is, talking about, for example, Gaza. People are very famine declaration in Gaza. Are people hungry? Are they not? Is there enough food? Is there not? The reality is on the ground, I know people who are dealing with lots of hungry people. The root causes of that are many and complicated and nuanced, and how bad it is to measure is messy and nuanced and complicated. But on the ground, people are hungry. And so the challenge for the church becomes, do we always get involved? Do we feed people? Do we not? You get discussions about social justice versus evangelism. You get discussions about, do we evangelize while we provide food? We get discussions about, do we actually provide aid to those people? You get blocked by other people who don't want you providing aid for those people. I'm not just, Israel's a complicated situation. I'm not just talking about that. Sudan, the RSF has completely blocked off the Darfur area, and they only let a few trucks in. People starving, and they let very few aid trucks in. What do you do about that? What can you do about that? By Easter 2033, think about the church as aid deliverer to the despised. That puts the church in a very interesting position. Despised by the local governments who don't want aid going to those people. Despised sometimes by the rest of the church who don't think you should be helping those people. Are we willing to work with the despised? Are we willing to be despised ourselves? The church has a prophetic voice. What does it mean to speak truth to power? And which powers do we speak truth to? It will be a very difficult discussion. The church as a networker and a resilience builder. Aid in the last couple of years has been gutted. And some folks I work with say a lot of that is good riddance. It was all, very difficult, sometimes corrupt, sometimes inefficient. But then how does aid get delivered? How does resilience get built? What part does the church play in that? Just as one example, How do we prepare for forthcoming disasters? Some networks are talking about pre-positioning materials and logistics. Other people aren't really worried about that so much. Let's just get people evangelized. There's a lot of complicated discussions there. Finally, the church as healer of emotional and physical trauma. We live in a time in perpetual war when people are perpetually traumatized. They've been widowed, they've been orphaned, they've been kidnapped, abused, they've been tortured, they've been jailed, they've been kicked out of their countries, they've been not accepted in other countries. People are dealing with trauma, and local churches on the ground have to be equipped and prepared and ready to minister and to bless and to offer healing for trauma. More and more, that will be the situation of the unevangelized. Handed over to be persecuted. Call this the rise of the autocrats. This is the state of liberal democracy as of 2024. As the world deglobalizes, as middle powers rise, a lot of those middle powers that are rising are, to one degree or another, authoritarian and autocratic. They're not democracies. And arguably, it's about the only way that they're going to be able to survive in the midst of a deglobalized world that is constantly at war. So this is not a geopolitical critique. It's just a statement of this is the situation on the ground. These countries are not going to be holding regular, free, common elections. There's also a rise of surveillance. This is the explosion of CCTV cameras worldwide. And now we are getting into a place where some governments like China are exporting systems to help control and manage those CCTVs, including AI-assisted facial surveillance, facial recognition. So we have autocratic governments that can surveil everything and everyone. And the reality is autocratic regimes tend to dislike Christianity. It's not always because they're Christians. It's not always because they're proclaiming Jesus. It could be because they're speaking truth to power. It could be because they're helping with aid the opponents of the regime. Be that as it may, autocratic governments don't like the church. This left one was China, of course, demolishing an evangelical church. The right one over here is the new anti-conversion regulations in India that will lead to a spike in persecution. This one in the middle is detainments among Yemen's Christian community, which I found interesting because you get very little indicator that there is a Christian community in Yemen. But they're being arrested and imprisoned, which suggests there's somebody to arrest and imprison. So that was an interesting little tidbit that I found. You also have a rise in mob violence and social hostility and family hostility. Sometimes this is cultural. Sometimes it's because it could be something as simple as my son's a Christian and he won't do the death rituals for me, and I'm going to have a terrible afterlife because my son is a Christian. It can be that kind of family hostility. It can be those people are Christians. They're not, participating in our religious rituals. Our community is going to suffer. We will persecute them and kick them out, and therefore, we'll be okay. It could be stoked up mob violence by governments or political powers or local business people or what have you, who maybe they need a scapegoat, maybe they don't want those people there. It could be a variety of reasons. So sometimes mob violence is a cover, and sometimes it is true social hostility. You get a lot of these, for example, Pakistan mob attacks a Christian settlement. You will find a lot of these sorts of things that are happening in the world today. And then in addition, we come back to the criminals. Churches are soft targets. So you've heard a lot probably in the news about Nigeria and persecuting Christians, and there's a lot of nuance. Part of it is, yes, jihadist violence. Part of it is warlords. We're going to take control of our particular area. And we're going to kick out anybody who's not with us because they're against us. And part of it is It's a business. Bandits will go in, they will kidnap, they will go into the worship service, they will kidnap all the Christians there, burn the church, and then demand ransom, and they will get paid. And where there's a business with a nice circulating, then they release the Christians, they go back, and maybe they kidnap them again a few months later. It's a circulatable business model. And as long as people are paying the money, and it's a difficult situation, but it's simply, there's nothing religious involved in this. It literally is organized crime. So the kingdom is suffering. Now, when you have wars and rumors of wars, and you have persecution and violence, there is an old saying that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church, and the idea that the church will never be fully eradicated. And that is true if you take the long view. But in the short run, in the 5-year, 10-year, the church absolutely can be persecuted out of a place. It absolutely can be killed out of existence. It is in some places. There was a lot of ministry that was going on in Sudan, and all of that, poof. 99% of all the work in Sudan has been demolished. People had to flee. It's slowly being reconstituted now in some of the aid kitchens, but even now it's really difficult, right? So there's an interesting article with a book. I'm going to get this book as soon as it comes out. It's called Suffering. And the article is Revival Begins with Suffering, Not Celebrity. And I think this is a very interesting position, that suffering is a formative way that we experience the Holy Spirit. Jesus said, if they persecuted me, they will persecute you also. That is Jesus worth it? Those who will pick up their cross and follow him, that's who he's looking for. So suffering is a key part of Christian life everywhere, but especially Christian life in the gaps. I have been asked this question repeatedly. Why don't rapidly multiplying movements or revivals happen in the West? Why don't they happen in the United States? And my answer more and more is, A, people in the US don't have felt spiritual needs. If you're sick, you go to a doctor. If you're depressed, you go to a therapist. If you're hungry, you go to the store. Now, understand, I'm not knocking. I just sent my son. He's got, I don't know what he's got. We were wondering if he had flu or COVID or whatever. And what was my first step? God forgive me, it was not prayer. It was, let's get you a teledoc appointment. It's gone on long enough. I'm thinking about that right now as I say that. We go to a doctor. Have I ever talked to a counselor? Yes, I have. Right? I'm not knocking those things. But if we don't have spiritual hunger and we don't have spiritual needs, what do we go to seek God for? Why do we need to be part of a church? Why do we need to be part of a community? Is it just a club? There's one of the movements that we work with says that the reason they're feeling that the reason that movements don't happen in the West is because we get the order reversed. That in places where movements happen, rapidly multiplying movements happen, it starts with a power encounter with the King of the universe. And then it leads into who is this king, and help me read scripture and help me understand what's going on. Here, we start with the let's read scripture and let's learn about the king and hope for a power encounter. But when you do that, what you're doing is you're activating the prefrontal cortex with all of its arguments and debates and everything, and you're not activating the part of you that listens to the Holy Spirit. Because that part needs to have an encounter with Jesus first to recognize his lordship. Be that as it may, the second reason I feel like, aside from spiritual hunger, is we have no suffering. Not really. One of the most interesting verses to me in the Bible is that once you have suffered, you will have left off all of the world. And I can't say I've suffered. How much of How much of lack of revival in the West is because we have no suffering? So it opens opportunities. The second one here is the Christians helping people enslaved by the cybercrime scam centers. So as the government in Thailand and Cambodia began cracking down on these scam centers, a lot of people were released and they were just on the streets. And so the churches have begun to help them. So there's opportunities in the suffering. So by Easter 2033, would leaders who have a militant background lead us to a church that is militant? I will say, mission societies that are led by former militants have a very different feel from mission societies that are led by, Western types. The church that prays together suffers together. Are we ready for that? Prisons as seminaries and crusade centers. I've known people who said, I don't want to leave the prison. There's too many disciples here. Caring for widows and orphans of martyrs is already becoming a thing. It will become a huge thing in the future. How do we do that? There is a significant change coming. I call this after the autocrats. By Easter 2033, nearly every autocratic leader will be in what I would refer to as a death zone. They will be old. Time takes its toll. And most of these are one-man shows. They have not, because they're afraid of, if you raise up a successor, he might succeed you a little earlier than what you were planning, right? So when they fall, there will be a lot of chaos as a result. These autocracies will not last. Talk briefly about people on the move. The number of migrants is growing. This is the total migration. You can see we went from 100 million to over 300 million by 2024. Most of them are actually going to Europe and Asia. And interestingly enough, well, I'll get to that in a second. So this is refugee. The green line is the refugees. So the red line is the total number of migrants. The green. So refugees aren't an enormous percentage of migrants as a whole, but they are a substantial. Have a substantial impact in the world, from 1.5 million in 1960 to 26 million today. Most migration, despite the headlines, does not cross continental lines. Most migrants from Africa are to other African countries. Most migrants in Asia are to other Asian countries. You can see the big, thick lines here on these. They stayed within their region. They're just shifting countries. Right? So this gives us an idea, however, about the church on the move. So the first thing is that the diasporas that are fleeing to the West, we get a lot of headlines. Most of those, there's a high percentage of those who are Christians or who are seekers. I have a good friend in London. He said, our church has grown, has doubled in size because we have Afghanis who came and joined us. And they were all ready to become believers or were believers already and wanted to know how to be believers. And so their discipleship course shifted to Afghanis. They ran an alpha course. And they were discipling these people and helping them to get baptized. So they are a high percent Christian. You think about it, the ones that are fleeing, a good portion of them are fleeing because of perceived religious persecution. They're not going to be the majority religion of their homeland, right? Second, migrant workers in the Gulf have been an enormous force for gospel witness. We know the stories about, Filipino nannies and construction workers and people who have shaped Emirati princes, and a lot of those are anecdotal stories. I don't know how true a lot of them are, but some of them are, right? Now you have Filipino and Indonesian and Burmese and Cambodians going to places like Korea and Japan, right? And Israel and other Gulf states and some toward Turkey. What gospel impact will they have in those places like they had in the Gulf? We hope a lot. Of course, the church is also the church fearful, disunited about how we welcome fellow believers, how we welcome potential believers. And that's a shame because a lot of these believers have been in the context of situations of evangelism, situations of persecution, and they are powerful forces for evangelism. There's a lot of stuff happening in Europe. It's happening because of migrants who are evangelizing, who are planting churches, who are evangelizing the lost, who are bold witnesses for their faith. By Easter 2033, the big questions will be, will the low fertility countries, of which there are increasingly many, will they welcome migrants as workers? Korea and Japan already a significant pushback. How do we handle migrants? Do we welcome them? How strongly will these rising big walls impact the church on the move? How hard will it be for people to move from one country to another? How hard will it be for the gospel to cross-pollinate if we're erecting border walls everywhere? Will the leaders of Africa and Asia have a strong impact on the West? I know of several leaders right now who are helping mentor new evangelistic church planting programs, for example, in Europe. I had one guy who wrote me and said he's got a house church in Copenhagen, and they really want to see growth and they really want to see reproduction, but they've got nobody to mentor them. Can I connect them? And the people I'm connecting them to are, some are Europeans, but some are non-Europeans. They're Africans and Asians who are working in the area, who've had significant church planting experience. And will the intercontinental and intercountry movements help spread the gospel? Throughout Africa, you know, for example, we've had a lot of people go from Sudan into Chad. A lot of them are refugees. There's another point where a lot of the Sudanese, some of the poorer Sudanese, have gone up into Egypt. The elite Sudanese have all gone to the UAE. So Sudanese can be reached in the UAE and Egypt and Chad, and to a certain extent in Kenya. But they could, some believers amongst those Sudanese can also reach out in Egypt and the UAE and other places. And the question is, will they, what will that look like, right, as people are scattered? Just briefly going to touch on this because a lot of people feel like this is kind of a silver bullet. So I know there's another workshop. Y'all should go see the other workshop. I have no idea who's talking. I have no idea what they're going to say. I'm not critiquing anything. That caveat aside, I have a few things here that I want to say about this. Who doesn't? Can AI help amplify gospel sharing? Can it help get the gospel into the gaps? So these are 4 areas. Translation is already doing it. A lot of AI work being done in translation. I don't know of a single person who's involved in a translation project that it doesn't somehow get touched by AI right now. Make of that what you will. I personally think it's good, but not always. And, you know, other people agree with me or disagree with me in various levels. Evangelistic media, where AI creates evangelistic media. This is the next stage up, right? The next one, gospel sharing in chat. I do find this happening, where there's messages coming in and they're having a trained chatbot respond to those messages, much like a customer service bot, right? And finally, can the AI help with sermons, teaching, and doctrine? Here's where everybody squirms. I'm not so sure about preaching. Okay, but have you ever gone to an AI and you've asked it about a particular verse and it's giving you a long essay and you said, oh, I never thought about that. How is that any different from when you go to Sunday morning service and the pastor gives you a long essay on a particular verse and you say, I never thought about that? What's the difference? Catholics say it's because the pastor has the Spirit of God in him communicating to you and AI does not. I don't know what Protestants say right now. It is an interesting thought, right? It's going to be more thought in the future. Where do we draw the line? Creates evangelistic ad copy. Probably nobody has a problem with that. Places the ad copy. You might think about, okay, my credit card's attached to this thing. How many ads is it placing? Responds to initial inquiries using stock training material. You might hold your breath at that, or you might not. You might be, yeah, fine. If it's properly trained, I don't have a problem with that. Responds to questions with discipling. Ooh, that's difficult. But how is response to initial inquiries using stock training material any different? It depends upon what your definition of discipleship is. It depends upon if discipleship is knowledge-based or not. What is discipleship? Is it transfer of knowledge? Or is it life on life accountability and following Jesus? Right? Will it create a whole new category of problems? Yes. The race for an AI Jesus is on. The AI Bible, we call it edutainment. People are losing loved ones to AI-fueled spiritual fantasies. Yes, it will create a whole new category of problems, right? Especially when we marry education and knowledge with entertainment. And AI has some of the AIs have a real bent toward entertaining you. They will do that. How will sovereign AIs approach theological issues? This is probably one that most people don't think about, but there are sovereign AIs. They are tuned to local, what's the word I'm looking for? Local rules, local principles, local beliefs, right? China's DeepSeek, that is a sovereign AI. It is releases open source, but comes from China, right? The UAE is doing the same thing. Saudi is doing the same thing. And some of them have been tuned where if you go there and you start using that AI, it will tell you if you're doing something that's not approved of locally, if you're making a prompt that's not approved of locally. If you want evangelistic material and you're using a sovereign AI stack, it may tell you, I'm sorry, gospel presentations are not allowed here. More interestingly, some of these AIs, I've seen a lot about, we need Christian AI. And my problem with that, when I think about it, is who's Christian AI? AI training is a black box. What doctrines and what beliefs are you training that AI on? And do they line up with what mine are? I'd almost prefer secular AI because at least I know where the thing stands. Some of these are very difficult to detect what's going on, but what they bring up and what they don't bring up can skew where you go, right? I personally, I went off AI for a while. I was using ChatGPT for a bit, and then it was like, yeah, you got so good at writing, I can't tell when you're telling me the truth and when you're not, right? And if it's not a subject I'm an expert on, I really can't tell. So I stopped with that one. I do use Gemini now, and I'm using it more and more. And I've gone back to Gemini very, very slowly because I have come to feel like Gemini at least is pretty well fine-tuned in that it will give me a wider range of perspectives. It will give me a wider range. But even there, I'm still a little on the cautious side. What is this thing telling me? You really have to think about it. Easter 2033. Will AI translation be trusted with translation? Sorry, the font size messed that one up. Will it be trusted with translation into minor languages? Will we trust those translations? Will translation and video creation affect streaming? I have seen AI tech where literally it is live translation in the moment and they map the lips to the new language. It is incredible. I could be doing this presentation and it would do it for you in Korean or Japanese or Mandarin or Arabic. And it would change my lips to match whatever right? How much trust for the doctrines that AIs hold? And finally, we're getting into a world of AI agents. The claw thing was just the first one. Now ChatGPT 5.4 has full agentic ability where it can control a browser. It can do all sorts of stuff, right? So we are creating AIs that can act autonomously. Do we trust them? With pastor, evangelist, teacher, spiritual director? I mean, that's a phrase we don't use a lot in Protestant circles, but basically it's the person that you personally go to with your questions. and with your needs and with your issues, right? It is interesting to some theological questions that arose. You start down a rabbit hole with ChatGPT. You start on give me the Greek of this particular verse, and pretty soon you're 15 steps down a rabbit hole, and you're talking about fundamental theological questions. And then the thing is making pointed statements about how these things apply to you, because it knows you're an INTJ, and it knows you're an Enneagram 5, and it knows you have these particular probably issues, and here's how it applies to you. You think that's a little close to home. Thank you very much. Let's go back to the Greek, right? Not far off from a spiritual director. I have had an AI tell me from time to time things that were incredibly useful and incredibly important. A challenging issue. Okay, let's talk briefly. Spiritual starvation. Is the world getting more atheistic or agnostic? No, not really. Pilgrimages. This is where to find the spiritually hungry. Every 12 years, India builds this megacity and tears it down. The biggest pilgrimage in the world is the Kumbh Mela. Tens of millions of people who come to India for this pilgrimage. It's the Hajj, it eclipses the Hajj. Right, this is the big one in the world. Arba'in, Shia Muslim pilgrimage, also eclipses the Hajj. And then, of course, the right-hand one is the Hajj itself. There are people who go to the pilgrimages to find spiritually hungry people, because it's where you would find spiritually hungry people. Right? Just because they come on pilgrimage doesn't mean they're not open to talking about spiritual issues and other ways, especially when they come home and they've had a disappointing pilgrimage and they're hungry and they have questions. Massive turning to Christ in the Muslim world. 2 major papers on this topic, and it only scratches the surface. Massive turning to Christ in the Muslim world. Tens of millions of people. There is a common refrain that Khomeini has been the best evangelist that we've ever seen. Right? Some of you are laughing. You've heard that phrase. It's because he showed you what Islam really is like. Right? Tens of millions of people. Okay? Absolutely huge. Atheist, agnostic, or deeply spiritually hungry. I love this article. She bet on K-pop, and Netflix got its biggest movie ever. Everybody know what movie this is? K-pop Demon Hunter. Have you watched K-pop Demon Hunter? I wept at the end of K-pop Demon Hunter. I literally sat there and wept at the end of it. Incredible. Yes, demons. Yes, Korean spirituality. Yes, weirdness. Yes, all those things. I get it. It is a very strange movie. Not quite as strange as Kung Fu Panda 3, I will grant you, which is by the same person, but it is a strange movie. Nevertheless, universal themes of power, destruction, hurt, and shame. Amazing, amazing movie. Just shows you the spiritual hunger of people. Right? 500 million views. How many people have Golden on repeat? Like millions upon millions upon millions of people listening to the song. And why are they listening to that song? It speaks to shame. It speaks to redemption. It might not have the right answers, but it clearly shows you the hunger. There's been not as much response to the gospel in the Buddhist world, but I don't believe it's because there's a lack of hunger. If anything, I think it's a lack of opportunity. We touched on this before. Militant zones will yield MBBs, militant background believers. They have potentially very different ideas about risk, about spiritual warfare, about organizational roles, about ideas about rescue. I did once upon a time have somebody who was with these militant background. They were believers. They had a church. And when they found out these people had been kidnapped, they got their AK-47s and they went and got them back. Now, I was like, okay, what about turning the other cheek? What about, I don't know. This is completely outside my box. Okay. But the fact of the matter is, we have to learn to, you don't dictate. They have to follow the Spirit too. They have to There's going to be some culture shock here, right? If we're going to work in these zones, there's going to be some significant culture shock. This one particular movement that I work with, they basically say, if you're going to come to Jesus and you're going to join our movement, you have to be ready to die. And you will do what we tell you to do. And I think, I'm not joining that movement because I'm too much American for that. Can't do it. But it's tens of millions of believers. Rapidly multiplying movements to Christ. 4 key books that describe this trend happening around the world. 200 million believers in 16 million churches are part of 40 families of movements right now. This is my day job. This is what I help track. I help them figure out where the gaps are and how to send workers there. If you want to work in the gaps, you're probably going to end up working with one of these movements, most likely, because these guys are the closest to the unreached. They grew up amongst the unreached. A lot of them come out of Muslim background believers or Hindu background believers. It's a very different environment. All right, let's talk just briefly. Closure, finishing the task. I'm not going to have a ton of time for, unfortunately, apparently this is a longer presentation than I thought. But sustainable closure, what does it mean to finish the task? 4 big barriers: the wars in the walls, unwelcome passports, language barriers. We're now starting to get down to languages that don't have any gospels. They're too small. No one's translated them yet. What do we do about that? And babies. You can't have a one-off campaign to evangelize everybody in the place without realizing that 5 years later, there's going to be children that need to hear too. Sustainable closure is we have to plant the church in this place in a way that it sustains and it continues growing. And it probably won't be us Westerners doing the planting. So how do we help facilitate? How do we help the church get planted in these gaps when we can't go there ourselves? And this leads us to another question. Is it mappable at the ground level? How do we figure out where the gaps are? How do we even know? And here we run up against 4 big issues: complexity, security, acceptability, and changeability. The situation on the ground in all of these places to find gaps is extremely complex. It's very difficult. And it does not lend itself to spreadsheets and maps. It lends itself to relationships. Second thing, of course, is security. I had one group that wanted to build a database of every known church in this particular country because it had been done somewhere else, mapped down to the GPS level. I was like, are you crazy? Because I'm not very diplomatic. I probably thought that. I don't think I actually spoke that out loud. But if you have a map, a database map with a GPS location of every church in the country, and you've got an autocratic government that does not like Christianity, and they are not opposed to taking computers, you've just given them a target list. So, of course, from a security perspective, mapping anything is really difficult. Then we get to the issue of acceptability. What do you think about a church that is, former Muslim radicals that perhaps act in a radical way, and, you have maybe 2 years before baptism because they want to make sure you're an earnest follower of Jesus and not a spy? Is that an acceptable church? What about a church that's not in a building? What about a church that meets in a witch doctor's shrine? What's acceptable? What about a church that calls itself a Jesus mosque? What's acceptable? What do you put on your list? What do you not put on your list? Do you decide whether the gospel's in this place or not? And yet we do. We do try from time to time. The final one is changeability. People move. Everything that was happening in Sudan, it's not there anymore. How frequently do you want to change your maps? How frequently do you update? I had one movement, they couldn't get data for 2 years. Why? Because it was too dangerous for their census teams to go over the border lines. Every piece of data that we have lags. If you look at the Joshua Project, if you're looking at a migrant group in Europe, I can virtually guarantee you that data is probably 10 years old. They would love to have up-to-the-minute data, but it's just not possible. What do we do? Leave you with this thought. Is the kingdom manufactured? Is it industrially placed? Or was it seeded? You know what this is? Anybody? A mustard seed. That is a mustard seed plant. Brassica nigra. This is the one that Jesus was talking about. In point of fact, it does not grow up into a big tree like an oak. That's not really what the point Jesus was making, I think, because it doesn't grow up into a big tree. It instead grows into something like this. A mustard seed plant is an aggressive, invasive, take over everything, outcompete every other plant, scrappy, unwanted little weed. And yet Jesus said it is this plant which nobody wants in their field. He said the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed plant that a farmer planted in his garden. And everyone's like, not in my garden, thank you. And it grew up to be a tree. That is an imperial symbol from Daniel. A tree that the birds rest in. That's the nations resting in the tree. Mustard seeds don't grow up into trees. Certainly not trees big enough for birds to rest in. But Jesus was saying it's as if it did. This is what you can expect the kingdom to look like. What we can expect the kingdom to look like and what we try to plant are scrappy, invasive, often unwanted mustard seed plants. And by the by, mustard seed is faith. You can apply this to too. If you plant mustard seeds in your brain, will they take over and shove everything else out? That's mustard seed faith. That's really the symbol. That's it. If you're interested in tracking further on this, I do have a newsletter that comes out every Friday. It's completely free and you can grab it if you want. There's the QR code.
Thank you, Justin. I know we're at time and we're starting to start lining up for lunch. You must stay for a couple of minutes.
I can stay as long as anybody wants to talk.
Any questions? We can stay for a couple of minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.